we'll get into the figurative language as well, but I had to look up what that was.
She likes the limericks. She's like, tell me
I
a
like
joke.
your haikus. The first recording we ever did, we did not record. Phil and I had a whole
We didn't
conversation.
And their descent into savagery. Savagery. And their descent into savagery.
Cards on the table here definitely use the internet to help analyze this.
Let's go beyond the first page. Let's go beyond the first page.
Hello, second pagers, and welcome back to Beyond the PhIrst Page with Phoebe, Isaac, and Phil. I'm Phoebe.
I'm Isaac.
I'm Phil.
And today we are going to talk about the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. I just want to remind everybody that if you like this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram, follow us on Spotify, and please feel free to leave us a comment and let us know what you'd like to see in any future book club meetings. Also, this is a virtual book club. We meet every other Monday to discuss a book, and we will be discussing major plot points and spoilers throughout this episode. So if you don't want any book, or in this case, poem, to be ruined for you, what we recommend is reading the book and then coming on and listening to the podcast. And I would just say, as a little plug for this particular poem, if you go on Spotify, you can actually listen to it, and T.S. Eliot, who is the author of this poem, reads it, and so you can listen to it how he intended it to be read and then listen to the podcast, and it's perfect. Also, we are going to be switching up the order of books a little bit because we're going to read The Bright Sword, but it didn't come out yet when we decided to, or when we thought we were going to discuss it on July 1st. So instead, on July 1st, we will be discussing Lord of the Flies by William Golding. And we are going to today have a very special rendition of some poetry by Phil. And a little fun fact about Phil, and you can talk more about it, Phil. Phil likes to write haikus, and I think it's a stress reliever for you.
I just like it. Yeah, I think it is too. It just gets me out of my head a little bit. I used to try to, instead of writing in a diary, I just write a haiku about the day. But then my Mac crashed and I lost like 500 haikus, so that sucked. But anyway, I wrote a haiku about both Phoebe and Isaac in this episode. And my haiku about Isaac was, I aspire to Isaac's level of carefree periwinkle coat. And if you don't know the story behind that, that's because Isaac wore a periwinkle coat every day from 1st to 4th grade. Totally a girl's coat, and just did not know. Just totally okay with it.
Mom and Dad told him it was a unisex coat.
Yeah, completely a girl's. And then my haiku about Phoebe is, thank goodness Phoebe became queen of tailgate, not a master baker. And the story behind that is because at Phoebe's senior soccer, I think senior day, they said what everyone else wanted to be and announced over the loudspeaker Phoebe wanted to be a master baker. And everyone was like, oh, what?
And instead I went to Penn State and put on tailgates for fun. So
And was a queen.
Good job,
Yeah.
Phil.
those are good.
Those
Phil.
are my haikus.
Loved
Thank
those.
you. Thank you.
I wanted to know if you guys, Phil, I know you write poetry, but do you ever read it, and what yours or Isaac's favorite poem is, if you have one?
Yeah, I don't actually really read poetry, but as a homage to my bachelor party, I do think my favorite poem is The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. I do love it.
Edgar Allan Poe's
It's
good.
very sonorous. Yeah. Besides a haiku, to me, it's got to rhyme. Like there's got to be a rhyme.
Yeah, I would have said The Raven for
Yeah,
the exact same reason,
point.
but I can't remember. This is the first poem I've read. I actually took a creative writing class my senior year of college, and it was one of the more fun classes I took. but I can't remember everything we read in it now. So
Yeah. I think the Star Spangled Banner would be mine.
that
Ooh,
doesn't count
good
as a
one.
song.
Nice.
It was a poem that they
Nice.
put a score to, I
Nice.
think, by Francis Scott Key.
True.
And I
Good
think
one.
also Robert Frost, The Road Less Traveled. That's Robert Frost, right? Because that's like a very obvious meaning that you can glean from that poem, unlike potentially this poem. So
True.
Phil, will you say, I think you picked this. Why did you pick it?
I did. No, I did just pick it because I've never really read any T.S. Eliot, and I feel like that's a name that, like, Tennessee Williams is another name that's just dropped, and I've just never read anything from Tennessee Williams. And I think it's good that we're reading poetry. It'll mix it up a little
Yeah,
bit. So
for sure. Cool. Isaac, will you, I know we talked about this last time on the podcast. This is basically just a copy and paste, but will you just, again, refresh us on the overall potential meaning of the love song of J. Alfred?
Yep. So this is the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot in 60 seconds. It was the first professionally published poem by Eliot in 1915. And it's about a man named Prufrock who is nervous and unsure about himself as he thinks about life and his place in the world.
Yeah. And then I think similar to Foster, we have, just because of the, obviously because this is a poem, we have a different layout than we normally would. And Phil, did you want to describe to our listeners what we're trying to do here and maybe an example of each of the words as you go through to try to explain better of the goal?
So basically there's a lot of different ways to like analyze poetry, but usually they're acronyms. And one of the ones that we thought was good was the MITSL poetry analysis, which is meaning for M. That's what I interpreted. And to be fair, I think this is the first time we're discussing it. So what I interpreted meaning to be is just the overall meaning of the poem, almost like the plot of the poem. Imagery is just what comes to mind when you read this, and it is sort of examples of what picture is he trying to paint. So if you're following along and watching a movie in your head, what are you seeing? Tone is something that's not on the page. It's almost like a feeling it gives you in a poem. I think it's a little bit different than a tone of something like a book. Structure could be sort of anything. If it's a short poem like a limerick, that's a very obvious structure it's set.
A haiku.
Or a haiku, for example, has a very obvious 5-7-5. Structure in a free verse or something like this could be sort of how he breaks the stanzas. There's a couple of lines on here that are indented where in the middle of a paragraph or at the end of a paragraph when you wouldn't think they are. But it's also sort of how he lays out his thoughts. That's what I interpreted it as. And then the last one is figurative language. And there's a bunch of common types of figurative language. The most common ones are similes and metaphors, personification, alliteration, hyperbole, synecdoche, which I'm not sure if that's the right pronunciation of that, allusion. So synecdoche is actually super interesting. Learned about it while analyzing this poem. It's when you use a part of something to refer to the whole of it. Say you're a ship captain and you would say somebody, instead of saying he's the captain of 70 boats, you'd say he commands 70 sails. What you mean is that he's commanding all 70 boats, but you refer to the sort of cool. Onomatopoeia is another fun one. So that's when, like, ba-bum, the words, they sound like what they're saying. So yeah, that's figurative language. And I think it is used most commonly in poetry.
Yeah. Or if you're Jodi Picoult, you're just throwing that in there.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. That's so true.
Very good rundown. Without further ado, let's talk about the meaning. And Isaac, do you want to potentially read something that described to you the meaning from the poem?
Yeah, so I picked a stanza. It is the 7th stanza in the poem. I took the meaning of this poem to be the meaning of life is to live it, not to necessarily sit there and think about it, to plan it out. Just like going out and doing it. And that is what life is. And if you don't do that, it's going to pass you by. So I can read the stanza that kind of spoke to me the most for that. And indeed, there will be time to wonder, do I dare? And do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. They will say, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin. My necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a single pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse.
That's a good
Yeah,
stanza.
it is.
That was also one of my favorite ones. I definitely you said that you were very
Well, the balding
really got
yeah
you.
definitely spoke to me right away. But yeah, I think the first part, do I dare, kind of sitting there. Yes, you should dare, like.
But that's what I wanted to say to this guy the whole time. I was like, let's stop pondering this and get after it. It's interesting that you had a very positive reading on that, Isaac.
That was
where
me.
You think he was saying, go for it.
I think he was. We can get to this in the tone, but I think to me, this is a guy speaking back with regret or warning. And he is now speaking the past of what his younger self was talking about. So I guess it could be spun positive, but this guy by no means is positive in my opinion.
Yeah. So I had the same question of, is it him looking forward to the possibilities or him reflecting back? I think my assessment was in the end what yours was, where he's looking back in regret.
Yeah, I think this poem was all about indecision. And I think in the end, you're right. It was regretting the indecision in my head. I don't think he regretted doing anything, really. He regretted not doing anything. I mean, that's what you always hear about life. It's always the things you don't do that you'll regret. And I think that this is probably what this poem was about to me, I guess.
Yeah, I think my only addition to both of yours is time in general. He was, I mean, it's mentioned by name in the poem many times. So I think, again, just reflecting on time and the shortness of time and the lack of time that we all have. So imagery. Yeah. Moving right along.
Yeah, I think that the imagery really, for me, I guess that's what I loved about this poem. It's that each one of these things that we analyzed did support each other. I guess even like the fog in itself, like a yellow fog, gives me the sense of just like sort of lost here. Sort of don't want to do anything, can't see ahead of me, but like can't see behind me. And should I go into the fog? Like Isaac was saying, should I do this? Should I do this? And that was one of the strongest pieces of imagery. And I hope I didn't steal your thunder with that. Too.
No, I was going to say the same thing. I think it's interesting, though, because yellow to me is a happy color. But I did not think at all that this was a happy color. This was like the sludge rust yellow that you get from, I don't know, the waste of
So
something.
As you were reading it, you were seeing bright yellow. And then when you got farther in the poem, it went
No, I don't think I ever was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think because of the gray fog, then I realized it was a gross yellow. Like a mustard.
I saw like a mustard, like
gross.
a tear gas or
Yeah.
Yeah. As did I.
I think I had.
Oh,
go ahead, Phil.
Yeah. No, I'd love to hear your line.
Yeah. So I did have a line from this, and in line with what you're talking about, Phil. And the afternoon, the evening sleeps so peacefully, smoothed by long fingers, asleep, tired, or it malingers, stretched on the floor here beside you and me. I just liked the long fingers. It's stretching on the floor. You could see like the afternoon to evening stretching on the floor. In my mind, you're seeing the pane of the window shadow outlined in the room. And so I thought for imagery, that's painting a very obvious picture, which he did do a really good job. And the cohesion with which what you're talking about, Phil, is so true. Everything is extremely cohesive, which it was hard to follow for me. But now that you're saying that, the message was always spot on, which was doom and gloom, in my opinion.
I think I got the image, and I say this that or I don't know if it's imagery, but I get this image in my head of this seaside town, almost like a town that was wrecked by some storm like 20, 30 years ago. I don't know why I'm getting that. Maybe because I do think he mentions the sea.
I think that was the other stanza that I was actually going to read, Phoebe, for mine, and I think it to me it says very similar things just later in his life. So that starts when I start getting that beachy feel, because then a little bit later he starts talking about the beach and stuff. But in the beginning, I was actually seeing a grimy city with the fog on the window panes, and like a Gotham from Batman. Yeah.
I also pictured a dirty city like London or something, people throwing their chamber pots out their window in the morning, like dirty city. But I also had this idea. I asked the question of what does the dress mean when he said a dress swishes past him. Maybe the woman who got away. I'm just thinking that now, talking to you guys. Really, I wasn't thinking very much reading this poem. It kind of was off-putting to me in general. What about tone?
For me, I thought it was very melancholic. But maybe melancholic is too uplifting, because melancholy is like this
bittersweet.
Yeah, bittersweet. Maybe it was just more bitter than sweet. I mean, he is choosing to reflect.
Yeah, I didn't get a wallowing, but I did get a regret, and even more so a warning, like a tone of warning. From his reflections, just for he put this down on paper to try to help some other young lad coming up in the city to take life by the horns.
Yeah, I really like your interpretation, Isaac. It's making me like the poem more. I said morose, so it sounds like we have.
Oh, so you did say like a despair. Yeah.
But I see both of you. The reflecting, I see the warning for sure. I think that's important. I think it's important because you're reading poetry, I think, to get a message. And so you're reading anything to get a message. So that's a good takeaway, other than just being like, woe is me type thing, which that was my feeling at least. I said droning too. Like we could have wrapped that up in the first,
Oh, Chat GPT, could you summarize this for me?
But Isaac, I feel like you got a lot out of it, actually.
I don't know. I almost feel like I'm making it too simple in an attempt to understand it. But the thing is,
I think poetry is a lot less modern.
We're reading Lord of the Flies next, and I just finished it. But the version of the audiobook I listened to, the author's note at the end was, the point of any writing is what you get out of it. It's not what a professor says. It's not what the author says it's about. So, I mean, you can like what I got out of it. Probably literary professionals would say you're being very simplistic, but if you get something out of it, you get something out of it. So
yeah, no, I agree. The structure, I think, is what really threw me. What did you guys think about the structure and rhyme scheme?
What do you mean it threw?
I think that's why I couldn't quite get into it, because there was stanza. There was 5-6 line stanzas, and there was a 2-line stanza, and there was no repetition, and there was rhyming, but then not every stanza was rhyming, and then there was a bit of slant rhyme. It didn't jive with me, and the cadence, I couldn't get behind the cadence, and so then it was hard for my brain to follow from one stanza to the next.
So I actually like that in poems. I think that a lot of times when everything just rhymes, like A, B, like when you can just easily follow it, I started to try to do that from English class, you label the things. And then it got out of control. I'm like, okay, this doesn't matter that much. Because I do think like if a poem is trying to give a message, yes, it's very impressive when it rhymes. So maybe we're disagreeing a little bit here, Phil, but the rhyming doesn't matter that much to me. But I like the different line lengths, broken up stanzas.
I guess I was saying that is exactly what the meaning and the tone was as well. It was this, I sort of knew what I was doing, didn't really know what I was doing. Like started rhyming, things started making sense, and then just like, okay, never mind. I think you get really cool breaks how he says, even in the lines Isaac read, they will say how my hair is growing thin, my morning coat collar mounting firmly to the chin, my necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? And then it just breaks. But then what you don't get by just reading it aloud is that the 4 lines that rhyme are really long. And then it just, do I dare? That's its own line. And then disturb the universe is also its own line. And I think that sense of just like, okay, I was on a roll here, and then just, maybe I should stop. Maybe I should slow down and rethink what I'm talking about.
I really like that point of the cohesion of this entire idea, Phil, and you make an excellent point for that's life of this. You get this flow going, and then all of a sudden, oh crap, something pulls you back, a mess up happens or life happens, as people say. And that is still very on theme with all of these different elements that we're talking about. That's an excellent point.
I think too, the differing or the differing of lines or the repeating of lines, the repeating of stanzas adds a emphasis. It's a way for the writer to emphasize a point that they're trying to make. So for me, I was reading this with the tone of regret and the meaning that we talked about already, but he talks about the women in the room twice as their own stanza. So you have this regret of I read it as a brothel, like him just like finding women as a comfort with no real connection. Or again, from the one I read, the do I dare? He really thought about thinking, he thought about, should I do these things? And that emphasizes it. So just I think the structure probably what for me was the best part of it.
Yeah. That makes me think, Isaac, I wrote down, that's another really good point. I wrote down his re-emphasis of T, and come to find out, T.S. Eliot was born in the United States. I thought he was English, but renounced his American citizenship and when he was older and was living in England, I believe. And obviously the value that English people place on tea is very important. So that was something that came up throughout his life a lot, I guess. I'm talking about simplistic.
Could he have gone to France, perhaps? I guess we could talk about this in the structure. That first paragraph, I think, is French. Did any of you guys try to translate it?
Oh, yeah. No.
I did look it up. So actually, Isaac, and Phoebe, that's Italian. It's not French. So, and it's actually Canto 27 of Dante's Inferno. And basically I'll just read it aloud. If I thought that my reply would be to someone who would ever return to Earth, this flame would remain without further movement. But as no one has ever returned alive from this gulf, if what I hear is true, I can answer you with no fear of infamy. So
it's him being completely honest.
Maybe he means he can't even have the courage to say it in a language you can understand, I guess. Like he can't even tell you, I'm going to be really straightforward with you in English.
I probably should have looked that up too, but I don't know. I think that plays very well into my idea of a warning of letting time go past.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think it's kind of what you're saying, Phil, where he he's only saying this because he knows he's never coming back. And so he doesn't have to face what's happening, basically. And like you're saying, he's even so much of a coward that he can't even put that refrain in English for us all to read.
Yeah.
Brutal.
Yeah.
The second part, I don't know if I'm as sold on, but it makes sense. I mean, why put it in a different language?
Yeah.
So then I think that our last thing is figurative language. And so maybe Isaac, if you want to, since you did a lot of research into this
Since
particular
you
one.
didn't really know what figurative language
I mean, Phil gave a
was.
great summary. It's essentially
You
it was
did.
better than the article I read after Phil called me out on not putting the correct figurative language in there.
I gave you the benefit of the doubt because the
was
things that you
tactful.
could have included could have been figurative language, and I was
so
just missing
honestly,
them,
I
but-
saw I was looking for metaphors. I remembered that one. I was looking for similes, not a lot of either of those. I think Phil said there was only 2 similes, which is, as far as writing goes, pretty impressive because the simile is such an easy one to go to. And probably for
Right. Hashtag Jody Bacol.
and metaphors are not far behind that. So probably personification in poetry, at least, is a pretty easy one to go to. That's the one I noticed the most. I had, the fog, scraping, engulfing, the afternoon and evenings, sleeping and stretching. And I think if you could go a little step further, I think those, to me, all those represented time, and just time being, I don't, maybe you guys could tell me what this figurative language is, but time being construed in multiple various ways. So probably not only personified, but other things as well.
No, I completely agree with you, Isaac. I don't know what that would be. I would say that was a metaphor for time,
there you
maybe.
go.
I don't know if that's true or not. But yeah, I thought the figurative language for me was my favorite part. That to me it gave me the ability to at least understand a bit about the poem, because I guess maybe the imagery and the figurative language, and the figurative language he used to help the imagery along, I think for me what stood out the most. I had the yellow fog rubs its back upon the window panes, lingered upon the pools, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap. Just different things to get the reader's mind to engage in the conversation that he was trying to engage in. So completely agree with you, Isaac. And like I said, that was my favorite part of the poem.
I appreciate a good scholarly poem, because I do think that the one that got me, I did love the personification, but all of the allusion, the literary allusion, I think is really cool. And so I'll read a couple sections. No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. Am an attendant lord, one that will do, to swell a progress, start a scene or two. Advise the prince, no doubt, an easy tool. Deferential, glad to be of use, politic, cautious, and meticulous. Full of high sentence, but a bit obtuse. At times, indeed, almost ridiculous. Almost, at times, the fool. And then also to tie into that one, I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. That was in a different section, but that is all just an allusion to Hamlet. And basically what he's saying is that I'm not the main character. I never made myself the main character. And at the end, he's like, maybe I was the fool. And he actually capitalizes the fool, which sort of was a key into me, that he's not just calling himself a fool. And Hamlet has this advisor, Polonius, who's like a fool. And he's saying, maybe I'm this lowly figure in Hamlet. And I think that's cool when authors sort of riff off of each other. Yeah. And the other one that I wanted to read, and this one's quicker, is just, though I have seen my head grown slightly bald, brought upon a platter, I'm no prophet, and here's no great matter. And that one is just a straight allusion to John the Baptist with head on the platter. And that's how John the Baptist dies in the Bible. And so he's talking about being humiliated in front of an audience, and he's not even a great prophet. I do really like literary allusion, and I think it gives you the lens and the scope to sort of read into it way more.
I think it's cool because it, like you said, it's so scholarly and it's so relevant. I mean, Hamlet is something that most people not myself because I'm not as well read and I can't remember what Hamlet was about. But I think it's cool because it's so relevant, and he can make his own work more relevant by alluding to Hamlet. So I liked that as well.
Those are some good finds, Phil. That went right over my head, but
yeah, same. Did you look that up on the internet, or you just came to that on your own accord?
yeah.
I mean, he says Hamlet in there, and then he also says prophet, and then says Lazarus a little bit later.
Yeah.
So the head on the platter and prophet that one's a good John the Baptist one. So yeah, no, I had to look up the fool though. I did.
But that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Cool. So we've done the MITSL, and I think just any other points you guys wanted to bring up. I want to look at mine too to make sure I got all my questions answered.
I loved the ending, actually. I thought the ending was really well written and just very cool, to be honest. And I'll just read the last couple lines. When the wind blows the water white and black, we have lingered in the chambers of the sea, by sea girls wreathed with seaweed red and brown, till humans' voices wake us and we drown. And I just thought that this was very cool. It was, I don't know, I interpret it not as a warning. I think that, Isaac, you're right, it probably is a warning. But I thought it was more like, when you hear someone talk about hypothermia or drowning, there's this like moment of ecstasy, like right before, where like in hypothermia, you actually start feeling really, really warm. And when you drown, like you've lost all oxygen in your brain. I think he's in this moment of ecstasy before he's woken and the mermaid stops singing, or he's woken up and he's drowning and he's gone.
So you don't think he dies? You think he wakes up and changes his ways of indecision?
Oh, no. I think he's
dead.
I think he's below
So
the
he's
water.
literally
I think
drowning.
I mean, he's freezing.
Oh,
no,
yeah.
I think it's like too far gone, I guess. Like he's contemplating what he could have done in the past, but it just
Doesn't matter.
doesn't really matter.
I just wanted the poem to be over, to be honest with you. When we got to the Mer women, I was out.
It was like 6 minutes long. It's not like...
It's one of poetry to me.
I just needed it.
Poetry to me is one of those things the same as art, where we went to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, and the minute I walked in, I was like, get me the hell out of this. I think it either speaks to you or it doesn't. For at least poetry and art, poetry and physical art. I know it just, he was so dark. It was so dark. It was so dreary. The same, actually very similar to this poem. And it just, to me, that's not what I'm seeking in poetry. I'm seeking an uplifting. I'm seeking a...
Yeah. She likes the limericks. She's like, tell me
I
a
like
joke.
your haikus. No, this did not speak to me.
I don't think I'm that averse to poetry. I like poetry. I enjoyed this once we got into it. But I will just say, for people who are, have made it this far in the podcast or are thinking, oh God, I'm never going to read another poem again, I like this poem now more that we have discussed it. Or I like the idea of poetry now more that we have discussed it. So
yeah,
maybe go grab
same.
another poem and hand it out to a few friends and then go over it. It does make it a lot more interesting than, just cracking open a book of poems and reading one and then being, well, that was a poem.
I don't know how people do that.
Yeah.
I don't know how people read a book of poems.
Yeah,
I completely agree.
I think I'm curious what you guys would recommend to our readers if they, now having
Do we
said
wanna
all of
rank
that
it or
about
no?
poetry.
Oh, we get to.
Oh yeah, let's do that first. Yeah, you're right, Isaac. Let's rank it. And so, Phil, do you want to just explain our Michelin scale?
Yeah, so the Michelin scale again is a 3 is like extremely high. You reread it. 2 is you would recommend it, but you probably wouldn't reread it. And then 1 is okay. Yeah, I mean this was it. 0, I think of it, you would actively complain about it. So that's our Michelin scale.
And what was it, Phil? The big reveal. What did you think?
I gave it a 2. I agree with you. It was longer than I'd like my poems to be. And I think poetry is, for me, I agree with you guys as well. It's something that is best academic and studied. And so not something I like to do often.
What about you, Isaac?
It originally was a week 2. more so for the reason because this is a muscle that not a lot, us three at least, and I would assume our listeners are not necessarily working out that much, and it is probably good to do so. But if you're into reading, you're going to be a better reader and a better literary mind by reading poetry, I think. It is now a little bit slightly stronger week too after our conversation because it is fun to, delve into things, talk about it, see what different people thought of the different meanings. And I think you can get a lot more out of poetry, especially by doing that.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you, Isaac. And I think it's exciting to me too in our conversation because a lot of times our three ideas of a book align pretty well about what we thought it was about, what we took away from it. And I think this was interesting to see because we all three had a different opinion and got different things. And I think that's the case for anybody who's reading it. Like Phil said, it's a little esoteric. So taking something different, everyone's going to take a different thing out of it because of that. So I completely agree. I think still a 1 for me, just because, again, it's not my cup of tea. But yeah, I would say that this reminded me that the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock reminded me of A Gentleman in Moscow, but in a better way. So if you liked this poem, I recommend A Gentleman in Moscow. Even if you didn't like this poem, I liked A Gentleman in Moscow and by Immortals, and I would highly recommend it. It's also a reflection on an older man's life, and I think it has a more sunny outlook, but I think still also a similar tone and a grave circumstance that this gentleman is in. He's trapped in a hotel in Moscow, obviously. Very good book. Would recommend it to anybody. It's a 3 for me. And so that's what I would recommend if you liked this poem. Phil, what would you recommend?
Mine was A Swan's Way by Marcel Proust, or Proust. I think it's Proust. It's the first of a 7-book series that is stream of consciousness. The first 50 pages are him talking about a dream that he just had, but it is so eloquent and it's really, you get a lot of meaning out of it.
I would recommend The Old Man and the Sea. It's got a similar tone. I don't think necessarily the same message, but it's a quick read, similar tone. If you got something out of this, I think you'd like Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway.
Okay, nice. Earn a little Ernest Hemingway. Very nice, you guys. And then what are you guys reading right now? Phil, what are you reading?
Yeah, so I just finished Qualified by Vera Nazarian. It's a 5-book series. I will not be reading the 5 books. If you loved Maximum Ride by James Patterson, especially the late ones where her and Fang have a thing, would love this one. And then Divergent, again, if you loved the romance between good idea, little too much high school girl romance for me.
Isaac, what are you reading right now?
I'm reading The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams. This sounds bad, but a worse version of The Assassin's Apprentice. It doesn't help that I just read the first Assassin's Apprentice book and only started reading this waiting for the second one to come off hold on the Libby app.
Dang. Well, that stinks, but it's good that you got the second book and you could get back on track with your binging that series. I want to just tell you guys, I read my most favorite book of 2024. It was called Freshwater for Flowers, and you would like this if you liked the Neapolitan novels by Elena Ferrante or The Awakening by Kate Chopin. And Freshwater for Flowers is by Valerie Perrin, and it was absolutely phenomenal. The woman is a cemetery keeper, and her story unfolds in a very fascinating way. Definitely, like I said, best book of 2024 for me. So that brings us to a close. And now, actually, I was interested, Isaac, to know if you had read Lord of the Flies, because Phil and I originally picked this. We both had not. It sounds like you have reread it since high school, but you want to tell us just briefly about Lord of the Flies and what we are getting into for next.
Yeah, so Lord of the Flies is by William Golding. It's about a group of British schoolboys who are stranded on an uninhabited island and their descent into savagery.
Well, I'm excited. That'll be on July 1st. Excited to read that. Obviously, it's a classic, and so very curious to get our thoughts and our listeners' thoughts on it. And with that, this is your official sign off from the siblings. Call somebody that you love. If you can, make it a sibling. Tell them about a good book or poem that you have recently read. Go to your library or use your Libby app. And until we talk again, stay classy, second pagers. We'll see you later.
See you guys.
Bye, guys.